Before we start today's episode, let me tell you about my latest adventure. Introducing Lux Coffee Co., a specialty-grade coffee company inspired by creativity and creatives. The debut range is sourced from some of the best farms in Brazil, Peru, Colombia, and Africa, offering beautiful flavors and notes. Our single origins and house blends are roasted every Monday for next day shipping. Visit luxcoffee.co.uk and use code PODCAST for 15% off your first order. And yes, there's exceptional merch too. Lux Coffee Co. is where art meets exceptional coffee.
What was holding me back? And there's lots of reasons that are holding you back. And I think being an introvert was just one of them. I want to just disclose to everybody, English is not my native language. It's my second language. And I came to America as a first generation immigrant. We were refugees from Vietnam. So this is like a whole culture shock for my family. And this sense of not belonging has traveled with me for a number of years until I was able to come to peace with it for myself, some kind of self-acceptance.
Welcome to Mindful Creative Podcast, a show about understanding how to deal with the highs and lows of creative lives. My name is Radim Malinic, and creativity changed my life, but it also nearly killed me. In this season, inspired by my book of the same title, I am talking to some of the most celebrated figures in the creative industry. In our candid conversations, my guests share their experiences and how they overcame their challenges and struggles, how they learned to grow as creatives. A creative career in the 21st century can be overwhelming. I wanted to capture these honest and transparent conversations that might help you find that guiding light in your career. Thank you for joining me on this episode and taking the first or next step towards regaining control of your creative life. You ready? Welcome to the first episode from the second season. And today I have my first returning guest, Chris Do. And I believe the conversation you're about to hear is potentially his most personal interview to date. We discussed the true meaning of burnout versus passion, delicate balance between confidence and arrogance, and a valuable lesson from business mistakes. Also, why having the courage to articulate your thoughts might be the most valuable superpower any creative can possess. So, it's my pleasure to welcome back Chris Do. Hello, Chris. Welcome to part 2. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Radim.
Fantastic stuff. So we've got nowhere to rush today, and I really want to follow up on the conversation that we had last time and kind of start at those elements that might be potentially holding creatives back from their potential. At the moment, I say that the makeup of a creative is 4 elements: ego, ambition, anxiety, and insecurity. How do you see that? Would you agree?
I think I know what 3 of those words mean: ambition, anxiety, and insecurity. I'm curious what ego means to you, because there's so many different ways of describing ego.
Ego, I think ego in most cases is a bravado. Like, we always attach ego to people who are sometimes bold, brash, sometimes driven in not pursuing their ideas. And yeah, I think ego is a negative thing, but it's also the driver for actually striving to achieve something, I think, in my opinion. Ego makes people leave their jobs when they don't get enough credit for the work. They say, I want to get more. So that's how I see ego. I think ego is often really misunderstood.
Yeah, I think that for sure there's a sense of drive in me, this idea that I have ideas that are better than other people's ideas. So somebody can call that ego. I think we can do much better in our education system. We can do a better job of showing up online. And I want to hopefully beat the drum and lead the tribe, so to speak, and bring them to a better place. So clearly some of it is ego. I'm very ambitious for sure. And I guess my wife would wish that I was not as ambitious, because we're comfortable. Can we just go into retirement mode? Like, why are you working harder than you've been working since you were in your 40s? Because I want to change the world. I want to make sure that my life has meaning and there's something I do to contribute to the advancement of society. The other two words, anxiety and insecurity, not so much for me.
Because quite openly you talk about being a loud introvert, and you talk about like how many times you taught a class and then you needed to recover for a day. I think it's quite refreshing to actually talk about someone being an introvert actually ticking the boxes, because I think in our inexperience, in our younger age, lack of experience, a lot of people claim to be introverted, but then they are really basking in the glory of doing a talk, and they're like, yeah, no, like I've had great feedback and this is going well. And of course, this is adrenaline. This is another element of our creative careers that helps us to move mountains. But with the introversy, I'm not sure if we talked about it last time, but how did you actually identify it and say, I am actually an introvert? Because we don't often know what's holding us back. Unlock that information. Which Pandora box did you open and it says, introvert, that's me. That's my Tombola ticket.
There's a couple of different concepts relevant to the question that you asked, which is what was holding me back? And there's lots of reasons that are holding you back. And I think being an introvert was just one of them. I want to just disclose to everybody, English is not my native language. It's my second language. And I came to America as a first generation immigrant. We were refugees from Vietnam. So this is like a whole culture shock for my family. And this sense of not belonging has traveled with me for a number of years until I was able to come to peace with it for myself, some kind of self-acceptance. So that made me horribly shy. To be in a world where very few people look like me, and in some instances in school, I was the only Asian person. So there were a lot of racist Asian stereotypes that are being thrown, and people would make you aware that you're very different and you don't belong. And I think it's one of the hardest things to do while you're still figuring out who the heck you are, what kind of person you want to become, when it seems like everybody's actively trying to push you away. That did not help. Maybe if I was an extrovert, I would have been more, I could adapt and be more flexible, but I just went inward. And so I'm struggling with multiple things at the same time, but eventually I find to love myself, accept myself for who I am, and just not care too much about what people say. Now I'm going to be tested. So I've actually been tested by a professional where we sat down for, I think, an hour and I took this test, and then they scored it and then they told me what everything means. And I'm an INTJ. And I've been tested a couple of times, maybe less formally, but it still comes up INTJ. But what's really interesting is I believe there's this thing in the middle between introversion and extroversion that people describe as being an ambivert, because nothing is like really binary like that. There's just scales. And so maybe I'm previously would identify as introvert, but I straddle that place in between those two, between introversion and extroversion.
You mentioned that first generation immigrant. It's quite openly known that people in such situations build more resilience because you're dealing with extraordinary elements rather than the people who are native, who are at home in a way. So would you say that since has brought you on a journey actually creating your own community? Because obviously what you're creating, and that's the drive and ambition, obviously changing people's lives. Would you say if your life had been different, would you have potentially find yourself on this career path? Would it happen? Because as we discussed in our first part, there was a lot of things that you did in your earlier life that influenced your work and how you created your career, your businesses. But the people element, sometimes we are a bit like horses. And we talked about horses before too, is that you want to be on your own, in your own space, but you're a herd animal. Like we vibe with others, we like others only to the point where this is enough. Can we share that? So the question is, how much of the early life had sort of an element of influence on what you're doing now?
It's hard for me to answer that question because this is one of those what if scenarios. And the best way I can answer this is I can look at my own children who are now native born Americans and I think identify as American. And the world has changed a lot since back in the old days when people would literally point their finger at you and say, go back to your own country, to tell you to leave. And there's still some of that sentiment that's bubbling up. Maybe not so much where I live because it's very diverse, but my children have grown up in America. English is their first language, even though they speak multiple languages. And I can see like the path that they're taking. And so if I look at my youngest son, he just turned 18. He's going to go to art school. He's been running his own business since he was 15 years old. He has over $100,000 in his bank and he has clients and he's teaching himself tools and He knows more about crypto and wallets and making digital art. And I think maybe if I look at him and say, if I grew up being accepted in a community, being raised by parents who supported the arts and allowed him to be himself, then I would be there. So the only way I can answer that is to look at him and say, I think I would still be here where I'm now. I would have started much, much earlier. I didn't even know I wanted to be a designer until I was 18.
Because I'm equally excited and frightened about prospect of our children knowing a lot more to what we did when we were pretty much finding our feet. If you talk about your boy being a kind of crypto king by the end of the last 3 years, that's pretty impressive. And I've got examples of some of my clients who've done really well in different industries and have made extremely successful businesses. And you speak to their children who aren't followed that, I think almost without a fail, they followed their footsteps. And you get a kid who's like 17, 18, talking to you about brand equity and strategy and stuff. And I'm like, when I was 18, I really spoke in a language of MTV, death metal, having fun, getting lost in life and not necessarily caring that much. And I think we got sort of the age of innocence and then the actual opportunities that we can grow now. So yeah, I see my kids, what they know already, and it's a totally different world, which it's exciting and frightening because would they burn out too quickly? Because I think our sort of long trajectory to taking off sometimes give us a lot of ways of growing patience and finding our own feet. And people who've got their dream lists, they're like, oh, I want to work with Nike. I want to work with that and that. I'm like, I mean, we've both done high profile work. And after 20 years, you're like, come, do I want to go on the same merry-go-round? Is that longevity? You once said that you lost yourself trying to please everyone and now you're losing everyone as you find yourself. I think, is that part of growing up, part of not wanting to just please people anymore? How would you describe it?
I think it's a symptom of self-acceptance, self-awareness, and then building self-confidence. I think initially it's very frightening to be ostracized by a community in junior high and high school and college, where I think you were running around listening to death metal and having fun and getting into trouble. My thing is like, hey, can I get a girl to be excited about me or something? So where our focus is somewhere else, and to be ostracized, to be not included in the community is a very painful thing to experience. One of my biggest worries in school is I wonder if I have somebody to eat lunch with because I just didn't want to eat lunch by myself. This is an ongoing worry until I develop enough stable friends where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have lunch with you. But it was always a worry for me, like first day of school, and it was a problem. And once you start to find yourself, you start to have opinions about all kinds of things. And you don't care so much to conform. You're not trying to blend in with everyone. You're actually trying to do the opposite, which is what makes me different? What makes me weird and unique? I want to lean into that. So I look a certain way, I dress a certain way. And some people are like, oh, that's too weird. And I would never trust a guy who looks like you. I'm like, that's fine. You don't need to trust a guy who looks like me because I'm not selling to a person like you. So this works pretty well for both of us, doesn't it? And so I have a different relationship now with the critics and the haters and the trolls. Bring them on. That's totally fine by me. And so the more I say something, the more likely it is somebody's going to disagree. And the only way you can get people not to disagree with you is to say nothing at all, which I'm not really interested in that.
That's very true. I think what you're describing sounds to me quite mature beyond the age that you were at that time. I think we say that people who are in such sort of position of trauma and negativity, like you have to grow up faster. So did you have from your parents' side, or did you have any help with those feelings and situations? Because at that time, emotional intelligence wasn't unearthed in most places. I'm not saying it was not invented. I mean, it existed, but it wasn't unearthed. So did you feel open about talking how you felt and what was happening in your world, or did you kind of metabolize it on your own?
I want to give credit where credit is due. I come from a stable home. My parents are still married. They love each other, although they argue like old people do, old married couples. And I never felt unsafe at home. I didn't have any kind of childhood trauma that I'm still working through. So from that point, I think it's fairly privileged to say that. My older brother, who's 4 years older than me, was like my surrogate father because he understood the culture. I could always lean on him and ask him for help in school. If I was being picked on, he'd said, you need to do this, or this is what people are really thinking. And he took an interest in trying to help me. Mostly is because my dad doesn't understand the culture. He was too busy working. And so we had this kind of different relationship. But in terms of my own feelings, and I'll give you an example. I was from a very early age creatively curious, and I was interested in lots of things that would be in that age and time seen as being queer or whatever it is. It's just, it's too effeminate for you to think those things. Like, I was really interested in patterns and textiles. I would read Sunset Magazine and GQ just because I wanted to see how people lived, and I was observing things. One of my fantasies when I was much younger, probably 11 years old, was the easy bake oven. Because I thought, wow, if I bake cookies, I could sell cookies and then I can make some money. At least that was the dream that they sold us on the commercials. And I remember my brother saying, that is not very manly or masculine of you to do. And so he just killed that idea. Like, men or boys aren't supposed to bake. So there was a kind of like, back then, gender roles were very clear and you were in a box. And if you're out of that box, you'd be ostracized. It's not so diverse and loving and accepting and very fluid as it is today, which is remarkable. When I see my own children talking about their friends, it's they, them, it's everybody, it's non-binary. It's wonderful to see this kind of level of acceptance. And I know this is going to be triggering for some people to hear, but hey, my philosophy in life, to each their own. You do you. You have a right to express yourself any which way you want, and I should not impose my idea of what is right or wrong on you. So this whole emotional intelligence and being leaning into me, it didn't come until much, much later in life. And it came from when I found a skill. And now I'm going to hang my identity on something. There's a great famous painting from Magritte, who is one of my favorite painters, the great surrealist painter Magritte. And there's this painting he made where it's like there's a suit of skin hanging on a hanger in a closet. And I think we're all looking to figure out who the heck we are, and we need to figure out our identity. And so for me, I didn't have anything to hang. It was just empty. I was just going to be whatever you wanted me to be. But when I found graphic design, that skin suit started to appear, and I could put that on. I could wear the label of graphic designer and say, that's what I am. That's what I must be, because this feels so natural and so wonderful for me. And so then you could start to build up from there.
I can definitely correlate with that identity. Like, I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy to hear that you had a safe home, that you didn't feel there was no childhood traumas. It's just quite interesting because we got like polar opposite. I was never really felt that safe at home, but I was in a surrounding where I was accepted. And I didn't know what I was working out for a very long time because I wanted to be something, was going after something. I'm just in a way of desperately longing for a title or for that skin suit being filled with something. So
Yeah.
I remember how empowered I was in bands, and I was empowered as a DJ, as a journalist, and then finding graphic design. It's just almost like you find a sort of Narnia wardrobe. Like, I can go for miles and miles and miles in this world, for the segue with the hanger, right?
Mhm.
Miles and miles into this world, which can change every day. It can be anything you want. And if you look after your footsteps, if you tread carefully, then actually that can turn into a proper world and proper universe where we can actually explore.
I want to tie it back to an idea that you brought up about young people have such a strong idea of what the world is. We have too much information, so to speak. And so their age of innocence is compressed, and then they grow up way too quickly. And maybe that's not going to change. But you asked this question about burning out. Will they have that time to explore the way we did? And we know that it's a long life and a long career. But I look at burnout as not so much related or tied to the concept of being super intense. I find the connection between being super intense and doing something you don't care about versus being super intense and doing something that you love. Like, I love video games. You love music. I like comic books. I can get burnt out on comic books. I just don't know how. I like to be creative, so I don't know how it is that I would be burnt out being creative.
I think there's a slight nuance to that motion that you find yourself creative every day. Whatever I do creatively is totally different to what I did 20 years ago. But I feel like when you open that Narnia, when you open that wardrobe and there's everything exciting coming, your life is kind of like dialed up to 11 because you, especially now, can have career as illustrious, as much energy as you've got, as much curiosity and opportunities that you gather. You can do anything. But that basically that goes up, 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 up. So what I meant was more like a plateau, or do you maximize the subject? So it was more about shifting preferences and shifting interest because you have completed an era of your life where you were a motion designer. That's what I meant. Like, you didn't burn out, but you switched. What I observe in the creators, like if you feel you're going to be chasing Nike for the next 40, 50 years, you're not. You're going to give it 10 years of a really good go when you can produce really good work that's relevant, but that experience will take you somewhere else. More about maximizing this, because I'm sure some people can stretch that curiosity over 40 years and do it slowly. Whereas I feel like with the turbocharged world, you can be anything and more. And that comes at price. That comes at price of energy. You have to burn energy.
I'm glad you brought up my motion design journey. Because, Chris, you didn't burn out. Why aren't you still doing motion design? And I think it's different for each one of us, where we define in our own mind what the terminal point is. So there's a point in your life, and maybe this goes back to ego and ambition, where I wanted to work with Nike, but then when I started working with Nike, I'm like, okay, that's not that special. It's fine. It's just another client. It doesn't change my life. And then I'm like, oh, what if I can work with Sony PlayStation? And then you wind up doing that, and it's, okay, now I'm starting to see a pattern. All these goals, these end destinations, when you get there, you're like, it's really not that special. It's okay. I forget who said this here. Somebody said this and I thought it was so profound. They said something like, a celebrity. I think it was Will Smith who said this actually. And loath as I am to quote Will Smith, I think there was something that he said was profound. He goes, at some point in your life, if you're so fortunate to experience this, when you have no more desire to buy anything, like everything you've ever wanted to buy, you can buy, you start to come to this realization that having more stuff doesn't make you happier, that money will not lead you to happiness. So he had to get to the terminal point or the terminus and say, now I've gotten everything I've ever wanted and I'm not that much happier than where I was when I was poor. So the pursuit of happiness doesn't come from the collection or accumulation of things. It comes something from a deeper place. And so when I was in motion design, I think I reached that terminal point to say, yeah, every year we do something a little bit better or more interesting, but my joy from it is getting diminished. And so now I know I need to explore something else. And as a creative creature, I think we follow our curiosity and we let it take us wherever we want, sometimes to the detriment of our own career, but that's an individual decision. I want to add one more thing before the internet gets really mad at me, because they will say things like this. They'll say, Chris, I'm burnt out and I'm super passionate doing the things that I love. So fair play. I agree with that. And there are two other dimensions I can think of. If you want to avoid that kind of burnout, I think you have to have a level of autonomy where you're self-directed, where somebody can't just keep telling you what to do, because that steals your sense of freedom. And the other dimension is that you're valued for this passionate thing that you're doing. So if you're a logo designer, you're very passionate, no one pays you, someone's always telling you what to do, I can see you running right into burnout. So I think at least those two other components have to be present for you to avoid that kind of negative burnout that we're talking about.
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like more support and information on your creative journey, you can pick up one of my books to help you do just that. My titles cover branding, graphic design, illustration, all the way to career business advice with ideas how to navigate the highs and lows of the creative process. You can pick up signed paperbacks at no extra cost from my store at novemberuniverse.co.uk, and we are shipping worldwide. Use code PODCAST for extra 10% off your order, and you can find the links in the show notes. Any day should be a new book day. I think you said one important word, which is autonomy, because you can be on that, creative treadmill, and a lot of people find out really quickly that a shiny logo and a multi-billion international corporation doesn't necessarily warrant amazing work and, creative freedom and amazing pay. And can spend whole of this podcast on the trading stories about how things were promised to be one thing and turned out to be something which was more of a nightmare. So you're chasing a dream and you come up with a nightmare. I'm actually happier now because it's the autonomy. Like things are just working out and perfectly enough. And I've never felt happier because I can wake up and do what I need to do whenever I want to do. Don't necessarily feel like you need to feed that hamster wheel spinning all the time and like pour tons of petrol on it just to make sure that it's working. It's a different mindset. And we don't talk about it, I think, enough. We talk about more clients and we talk about more work and more portfolios and more successes. But it's almost like celebrating the art of slower living in a world that's really on steroids right now.
I think that's a very European mindset because there's a long history of culture and the rat race. And so society evolves. And so that we can learn to live our life while we're living it versus waiting to postpone living, which is like what Americans do, I think, where we're conceived to think, you know what, you have this moment, go conquer the world, and you work like mad at the cost of many things. There are many sacrifices being made, and there's no such thing as enough. So we keep getting more and more and more. And I think that's part of the beauty and the curse of the American entrepreneurial spirit.
Did I hear someone once said that people chasing American dream mainly because it doesn't exist?
I guess, but I think I've gotten a piece of that American dream, and I can tell you from my perspective, it exists and it's alive and well.
Speaking of our surroundings, there was a great sentence in Derek Sivers' book called Hell Yes or No. And he's got a chapter that says, the goldfish don't know they live in water. And he said, I went to teach class in Singapore and I said, hey, who wants to start a business? And one person like timidly said, maybe me. It's like, wait a minute, I'm from America. Everyone wants to start a business, especially on the West Coast. And you realize because you eat that fish in the water, swim with another fish, you don't really necessarily know what the world outside is. So how much of your surroundings at your younger age was instrumental to your career development? And obviously you see ambitious people, you see everything on steroids, as I like to say, keep saying, and there's an American dream to chase. Would you say if you never moved, again, it's a what if question, I'm sorry about that, but yeah, how would you describe the surroundings and the effect on you?
I think there's a couple different factors. One is we're immigrants, and so immigrants or children of immigrants want to do better. They left a country in pursuit of better, more, or security or safety or something like that. And so we inherit that plan from our parents to do better than they did. They make sacrifices so you can achieve more. And it's really interesting for me to see some of my cousins who are native born Americans and to see that spark, that drive that their parents had that I have. It's not there anymore. It's totally gone. It's like in 1 or 2 generations of living in America, we settle into middle class really, really fast. So it's fascinating for me to observe this in my own family. And living on the West Coast, in Los Angeles in particular, because I didn't grow up in Southern California, I grew up in NorCal. I can feel the difference now because this is the land of broken hearts and empty dreams, because people from all over the world, not just from this country, come here to make it in music, art, fashion, and movies, part of the entertainment capital of the world. And it's hilarious. And comedians do this all the time when they're like, oh, I'm in LA, where the valet looks better than the model that was at the agency. That's because they came here from wherever they came from to make it and couldn't. So now they're parking your car, serving you food. And it's quite fascinating. And we don't take notice of this until we step outside of that circle and we come back in. And I'll tell you what I mean. There's all these pretty generic, nondescript buildings here in LA. I drive by all of them. I'm like, I don't know what anybody does in their accounting. I don't know. And in each and every one of these buildings, potentially are multi-billion-dollar companies that you would not know anything about. But what happens is you go to a taqueria and you sit next to them. And the way they talk and the way they carry themselves, and you start to absorb that energy. There's a little hole in the wall taqueria called Tacos Por Favor. Their Mexican food is okay. It's not even great, but people love coming there because it feels super authentic. It does feel like you're stepping into Mexico, but you'll see movie producers there. You'll see power real estate brokers there. And it's just LA. It's how we do it. And when you go outside of this, you start to realize everybody here is just not that driven and not that ambitious because they've adopted a different philosophy of life. And I'm seeing that and feeling that difference. Just like Derek Sivers said, oh, maybe not everybody wants to own their own business. What a strange concept.
So it sounds like they've created a global fishbowl now, because if you choose to be a goldfish in that fishbowl, you can actually just tune in into that world. Because sometimes I'm sure through your courses, and you come across people from all different walks of your life, from different sort of corners of the world. I think we're instilling this more into people, actually, is they're showing them there's a possibility if you apply yourself and if you deal with things differently. There's something about physical surroundings. So you can find yourself in a very narrow lane. We call it high shoulder, the slowest lane. Then you see all these people in their flashy cars, hypothetically just zoom in somewhere. And sometimes you're just like, where are they even going? Do they even know what they're chasing? Because it's the bigger and bolder the status, the flashier the car, and the bigger the wealth, I'm a better person. Whereas sometimes you can go back to that suit on that coat hanger. Why isn't that suit? Because it's shiny and it's gold plated. They call it a gold hanger. But it's this thing of like, how do you give people like a soulful nourishment? Like I say, you know what, this is actually almost the meaning of life that you can do with your story. It almost feels sad to see people like putting material goes over to nourish the soul and actually satisfy the story.
I can add a little bit more to this. I remember reading an interview of Bono from U2, and they asked him, you could live anywhere in the world. Why do you live in Ireland? Because he goes, because people here remind me to not get too big. That if I step out and they will slap me in the head and say, hey, who do you think you are? I know at one point they're the world's biggest band, but he wants to be kept humble, and that's a virtuous thing for him. And I notice when I travel and I talk about these ideas that I feel like are part of my ethos, people are like, ooh, we don't think that here. There's a term called tall poppy syndrome. There's an expression in Ireland that's you're too big for your boots, too big for your britches, these kinds of things. And humility and self-deprecation and living a modest life is considered virtuous. And I'm seeing this in lots of different ways, and sometimes very negative, harmful ways, because I have friends who have an unhealthy relationship with themselves. They don't think of themselves very highly. They're always apologizing for things. They don't ask for anything, and they just disappear. It's, oh no, it's just everybody's thing. And then there's this idea of like American exceptionalism and achievement where we applaud here, where people are like, oh, I just moved into this penthouse and I just did this, and we applaud. We're like, good for you, young person, man or woman or other. And then in Europe and parts of Asia, it's, I just moved in a penthouse. Oh, who do you think you are? You think you're better than us? It's this whole different attitude, right? We celebrate success here, and that can create a pretty toxic culture, but I don't look at it from that perspective. I just think you have to be the first in line of your fan club. If you're not, I don't know how to like you. Because what I see is the opposite, where, oh, I just have such an unhealthy relationship. I'm full of imposter syndrome, and I become quite needy for you to affirm me. And so what happens is it becomes really unattractive. I can't be your fan because if you don't like you, why would I like you? So there's this idea, and I know it's mostly prevalent, like America versus the rest of the world. In Canada, people are much more reserved. In Europe, parts of Asia, maybe not Middle East, parts of the world seem like this is a horrible idea. But I see all the kind of psychological and emotional harm that it's doing, and I'm not so sure that's a better plan.
It reminds me of English comedian who went to America and he said, look, I've introduced myself. I said, look, I've won some awards. And everyone goes, oh my word, you're amazing. Let's see what your comedy you can do. And he says, I came back to England. I said, I just won an award. And people go, yeah, all right then. So show us what you can do. Like they just don't accept that level of achievement. They're like, people are skeptical, and sometimes that can spill into so many different walks of life and work that only when you really prove your status, you get more accepted in life, creative life or professional life becomes easier in a way of like people earn your status, you earn your sort of, the authority. But you speaking about Bono, I think he really would fit all four of those initial elements: ego, ambition, anxiety, and insecurity. Sometimes we see people with anxiety and insecurity as arrogant. And I think that's such an unfair way of treating people, because you see someone who's really uncomfortable about a situation they need to be in, surrounded by people. He's an arrogant one. And actually, that's my personal experience. I was a young DJ and I always had to navigate like crowds of people to get into the DJ booth. And I was really petrified. And I would be getting these stories. Oh, no, it's arrogant. No, I'm not. I'm the opposite. And it kind of like that goes back into our creative careers. Like sometimes our insecurity can manifest itself as an arrogance because you don't always have the eloquence, the verbose gymnastics that you can make it sound so eloquent that everyone's eating out of your hand.
Yeah. When I run a workshop, we talk about this a lot, especially outside of America. I do need to set the stage for people to understand some of the things I tell them about, because when you don't think highly of yourself, then you're not likely to ask for what is fair. and you negotiate against yourself. The client doesn't need an ally in the negotiation process. You need to stand up for yourself. You need to say, what I do is valuable. If you don't see it, no problem. I'm not going to try to browbeat you, but I think it's valuable. And in order for me to give you this value, you have to see value too. Otherwise, I need to move on and you need to find someone who can do this for you. So I set this up. I asked them this idea because I really don't like this word humility. And when you look up the dictionary definition, and I'll probably get some arguments after this, it says something like to have a low opinion of one's own skills or achievement. I'm like, why is that a virtue? Now, we know that to have a high opinion of one's skill and achievement is not good. How about we just have an accurate one? But then I asked the audience in the group that's in the workshop, is there ever a time when it's good for you to be more important than other people? And they're like, no, that's such a strange, why'd you ask us this question? I say, okay, here's the real world scenario. You're a director. You're shooting a commercial. It's a 30-second commercial. You're on set for one day. And during the break, the agency who's there, who's paying you to do this, see you changing the lights, lifting heavy things, moving around. Do you guys think that's a good thing? Is that a noble thing to do? And most of them would say, yes. It shows that the director isn't so self-important that they can roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty and do the work of the lowest person. I said, okay, now I want you to change the optics for a second. Forget that you're looking from this super kind of judging point of view and look at it from the lens of the clients. Do you think the clients are impressed that you're so humble? Or do you think they're thinking, why is the director doing the work that we've paid other people to do when we need them to be focused on the scripts, thinking about different problems that we might encounter, having the vision so that we feel like the $200,000 we just spent is going to be good? And here's the problem. After this shoot, you're in the edit bay, and then the clients ask you, do we have coverage of this other thing? And you're like, no, we didn't shoot that. You know what they're going to be thinking about? Yeah, because you weren't thinking about that, because you were too busy lifting things up and doing things versus letting the people do their job. So there's a very different perspective of how to look at that. And let's just say you're on a submarine. Are there people that are more important than others? I believe so. The captain's pretty important. The people who control the ship are pretty important. The people who fix the engines are pretty important. Without them, we all die. So there are certain situations where we can share importance and shift our role. It's probably not healthy to walk around always thinking I'm the most important person all the time in all situations. But there are sometimes when it's advantageous for you to do so, and not to do so would be detrimental to everyone's welfare.
In our careers, we go a list longer than our arms of the good decisions, and maybe even longer with the decisions that didn't go that well. With your life story, your journey, your businesses, what are the things that you regret doing?
I regret very few things, but I've made some dumb decisions. When I was a young boy, I had lots of regret. And I realized regret is not a helpful emotion. Regret is wishing you could change the past, which creates a lot of negative energy. And we know until time travel is invented that no such thing can be done. And so the story I like to tell people is when I was younger, during Lunar New Year, you get these little red envelopes in some Asian cultures. And it's like Christmas, New Year, and your birthday all together. That's how you have money for the rest of the year. I remember it wasn't that much money. Let's just say it's $20. And I misplaced the red envelope, and I was like running around just like super stressed. I wanted to cry. And I'm like 9, 10 years old. And I'm like running around the house asking my mom, like, Mom, have you seen my red envelope? She says, honey, there's red envelopes everywhere. How would I know it's yours? And I said, somebody took it. Somebody took it. I didn't want to take responsibility for that. And she goes, do you think your dad took it? I'm like, no. Do you think I took it? No. Do you think your brother stole from you? No. And I kind of walked away dejected, defeated, just head hung low. I wanted to cry. But then in that moment, I got some clarity. It's what am I regretting right now? That I've lost this opportunity. There's an opportunity cost. I actually didn't have the money before that day. And now it's not really going to impact my life. But what I did was I just thought, regret is a horrible emotion. I'm going to make a life change here. So from that day forward, I have a system of where I keep things. My phone, my chapstick, my keys, they're always in a very specific place. And it's almost like an OCD tick, but I know where everything is. And my wife is the exact opposite. She's always looking for her keys, always looking for her phone. It's like the running joke in the house. Mom's going to ask us 3 times a day, has anybody seen my phone? So when I make a mistake, I embrace the mistake as an opportunity to learn, not as a thing I wish I didn't do. But now, having said that, we opened a New York office. So we're in LA, and our reps tell us we need an East Coast office. This is why we're not getting work, because they want to have a local footprint there. So we went through a couple of iterations of starting a New York office, half-heartedly, first renting a space from another company, and then eventually creating our own space, hiring a duplicate team of executive producers, office manager, and creative director. It was a nightmare to manage. We didn't make any more money. We just had double the expenses now. So the lesson learned there is, you know what? If you ask salespeople what to do, they'll just ask for everything because it doesn't hurt them. There's no consequence for them to ask for more. They say, you should hire that director or you should hire that creative person. And if you listen to people to tell you how to run your business, they'll help you run it into the ground. That was the lesson. I don't regret that because I appreciate that opportunity to learn. I'll give you one more example. There was a case when I did not read the fine print in a contract. Because you know why? Because I didn't want to send it to my attorney. I was like, I got this. I've signed in so many of these contracts. And in the contract for our sales rep, it says at the end of the cycle, it renews every year automatically unless expressly written. So we had a situation with our sales rep where she didn't like what we were doing. We didn't like what she was doing. So ultimately, I guess you don't need me anymore. I quit. Fine. So now we're busy looking for a new rep. She just kept silent for 2.5 months. Didn't hear from her, didn't get any reports on any new leads or anything. January rolls around. She goes, hey, so what's going on? What are the new boards like? We're like, what are you talking about? You quit. She goes, no, I didn't. And you're still under contract. I'm like, how are we still under contract? We're done. There's witnesses. She goes, read your contract. Not reading that contract cost me $30,000. That I had to sign a check over to someone who wasn't working, who just sat silently, not to provoke us. And she knew exactly what she was doing because we didn't hear from her in 2.5 months. She knew she had us because it was in the contract. So when I called up my attorney, I'm like, Stuart, what are we going to do about this? He goes, Chris, this is why you have attorneys. I would have never let you sign something that has an auto renewal clause. It benefits them. It does not benefit you.
It happened to me recently. There was a debt collecting agency. I was pursuing a debt, one of a kind debt, and there was a renewal. So you can have our unlimited services, but there's a renewal every year. I was like, okay, I need to make a note. I don't need them for more than 2 weeks. I'll make a note. Of course, as things happen, you forget about them. And they only got themselves known because they wanted to raise the money. They wanted more money next year. So I'll be giving you 30-day notice or 60-day notice that our fee is going to go up. I'm like, you just reminded me to cancel this contract now, really chilly now. And paying attention to things is important. And as you said, regret is about wishing to change the past, but then there's dumb decisions. And I think in our creative careers, our professional careers, we regret a lot of things. I think it takes so much of our energy, whereas that debt that in the end had to sign off or write off in the end was actually a dumb decision, not pursuing my own my processes, but you learn from it. Do I regret it? No, I've learned so much from it. And I think, again, it's a part of that sort of self-discovery and that sort of acceptance that you're like, you know what? It cost us money, but have you learned here? What then we can tell anyone? I think that's really important, but it just feels so earth-shattering when these things happen to us in our early days that we feel like the world is finishing. I will never recover. This will have a long-term impact on everything that we do. And that's we bounce back really quickly. And actually we have a slightly more stronger armor around us. It's quite remarkable, like getting older, I think I would say. Would you say this has always been one of the good things to happen to us?
To get older and learn things and have a different perspective?
Yeah.
I think so. But I think age is not a great predictor of wisdom because there are young, wise souls and there's old, dumb fools. And it happens both ways. And it's just when you learn to see things for the way they are and you embrace what you can't change and then you work on the things that you can, I think you come to some kind of enlightenment. I think I'm coming around to this idea that all we have is the present. What happened yesterday is a memory, and what you project to be the future is something that you get anxiety over. That there isn't a lot of good productive output to sit there and relive the good old days, or to beat yourself up for dumb decisions you've made. That's just called life. Or to say, look, tomorrow I'll do this thing. So you put off what you're going to do today and wait for those things to happen. I think all you have is the moment that you're in right now, the present.
Sometimes we feel so scared of it. Sometimes we just don't know how to deal with that moment, and then we wish, and we regret. You mentioned a word on our both conversations, and the word is retirement. You mentioned before that you retired, and then you're retiring now. What does your future look like? That's a scary word to think about when you're 50. Is that right? 51?
I'm 52. Yeah.
52. So every time I speak to you, I get a sort of sense that there might be an element of slowing down. There's a change. Is that right? What does retirement sound like at 52?
I don't think about retirement at all. The day I retire is the day I'm getting ready to die, I think, because I've heard this piece recently about our identity is something that can evolve and change and grow, that we should really focus on that and not so much on the destination of where we're going. It's just the journey itself is really fun. And if we learn to embrace that, there's very little that will set us back. So if I'm not doing what I'm doing now, I just don't know what else I would be doing. I'm in a privileged place where I don't have to work for money anymore. So I get to choose the things that light me up most, the things that ignite my passions and stirs my soul and gives me great joy. And one of the greatest things that I think anybody can experience is the act of helping others is its own reward. Like, you feel good to do it. They express gratitude to you. And if you can build a business around helping other people, that's a pretty good career to have. And I keep telling people, with apologies to everyone in the room, I think I have the best job on earth. I get paid well to help people. And if I can just keep doing that, I don't see why I would retire. Now, if I cannot, like, if my memory fades and I can't articulate my thinking, or I just get so bitter and jaded, I'm yelling at everybody all the time, that's time for me to do something else.
So would you say your personal circumstances are one of the biggest drivers that you see your students wanting to emulate? I think it's the ultimate win at life when you say, I do things that light me up and I get paid for them. I don't have to work for money. I just choose the right opportunities, which is indeed a very privileged position. How is that translatable? Do you see that with your status and your achievements, mainly achievements? How do you teach that? How do you distill it?
Very good question. I try and remind people of a timeline, because what people do is they often compare my ending to their beginning. Well, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and this is where you're at, so I'll do that. I said, well, you have to look and unpack 30 years of work experience and certain decisions being made. I just want you to have realistic expectations and to understand this is not instantaneous. I have no get rich quick scheme. I don't know how to make you brilliant in one night. It's a lot of work. If you're willing to put in the work, we can accomplish lots of things, and we can probably do it on an accelerated timeline, given your penchant to do the work and how well you take direction. If you can do that, we can get pretty far. And this is a wonderful thing. But just for context here, I started my company when I was 22. This is in 1995. No, that's 23. And I've been working in the motion design industry for 20 plus years. I started making YouTube content when I was 42 years old. So when people are like, oh, it's easy for you to say it, so you have to remember, you're only 30 and you're already making content. And I didn't start until I was 42. I didn't know I wanted to be a designer until I was 18. You started when you're 14. So you're already on an accelerated timeline, but be patient. Give yourself some grace here and work through this, because that grit, the ability to do something over and over again until you get good at it and not quitting, is something that you really need to get good at. That's a life skill.
It certainly is. I always feel like we grow into patience. I think that's the biggest asset that we can ever have, because patience, the P word, like, how do you comfort people in such a turbocharged world that kind of makes you believe that you need to be someone so quickly? How do you get people to slow down if that's even possible?
I don't think it's possible to convince somebody of something that they don't believe to be true themselves. So first we have to move their belief system and ask them, is this consistent with how you see the world? And what kind of evidence do you have that this is true outside of this one example? I share this kind of insight or my way of thinking with you, and it might be shocking to some people. I do some coaching, I do some sales role plays. And the way that I'm able to win or defeat the other person, if you will, is I just make the assumption that people haven't really thought about what they think about. Some people think about what they say. Very few people think about what they think about. Whenever somebody asks me a question, I don't want to be patient. I want to achieve this. I just assume it's a dumb idea and they haven't really thought about that. They just woke up one morning like, I think this, I believe this. What we do in critical thinking is we try to look at this from a number of different angles and see if this is consistent with reality, if it's consistent with your own behavior. And we find that there's many inconsistencies. So there's an overwhelming mountain of evidence that this isn't true. So now all I can do is, what decision do you want to make? That's up to you at this point. What I can do is help to facilitate the thinking by asking you certain questions so that you can come to your own conclusion. So if somebody wants to work out and get really fit, they've already decided they just need a permission slip from you so that they can get started. And if somebody doesn't want to get fit and doesn't want to work out, I don't care how powerful your rhetorical skills are, they're not going to move. It just doesn't work.
I think we haven't listened. I think we haven't really learned, haven't mastered listening to ourselves so the world listens to us. I think when, especially with the point of sort of anxiety and security, taking those two forward, it's so easy to try to finish people's sentences. It's so easy to try to sort of butt in. It's so easy because we try to validate ourselves in the room. Okay, you know what? Look, I'm clever. I know what you're trying to say. No, it's not what I was trying to say at all. In the book that we both like the title of, which is What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith, he talked about the exercise of count to 50. Like, close your eyes and count to 50 and just realize how quickly your mind will come and derail you. And I've started doing it in agency workshops with creatives. And I borrowed it. It's so clever. It's one of these things, I wish I came up with that because it's so good. And you get people to sit down, close their eyes, count to 50. I think about 90% of people don't make it past 6. There was only one guy who made it to 20. No one makes it to 50. And you're thinking, it seems quite simple. Let's try it. And if anyone wants to try it, they should, because it's really hard to let yourself just be focused. And I think if there's one thing that I'm always talking about and I always try to people to do more of, it's okay to sit back, listen to the wrong argument, take it all in, just make sure that you know what's going on, because if you got the answers, it's much easier to actually then enrich the situation and fix problems. And I think that's the problem of our current lives. We are led to believe that everything could be done quickly now. And you talked about it last time, people being under the gun because we got faster tools, better technology, everything's better. Yet our fragile minds sometimes go, what do I do with this? But what is the one thing, before we close up, what is the one thing that you wish every new creative or every seasoned creative actually had? If you could give one superpower to everyone to enrich the creative world, what would you do?
I would wish for people to have the courage to say what they think. This is a communication skill with your personal relationships, so your partner in life, with the children that you might have, the siblings that you might have, and with your parents, with clients, and especially with yourself. There's something very powerful about language and words. And I heard someone say this recently, that your words shape your world. And we've heard this expression, like when you were teased as a kid, somebody would comfort you by saying sticks and stones may break your bones, but names will never hurt you. And like, no, names will hurt you, because words are how we understand things. Words are how we code our experiences, how we tell stories, how we communicate and share ideas with each other. And so there's this idea that I came upon recently about why it's so important to learn to articulate, to choose the right words to code your experiences, and to be able to speak the things into existence. So the idea goes something like this. There's a pool of energy that we draw upon, that when we do something and when we say something, it comes from the same pool of energy. And the person goes on to posit that there are doers and there are sayers or talkers. There are people who make things and there are people who talk about making things, but usually there's not a lot of overlap. Hence the whole, they're career professionals and they're career academics, and that's usually how it works. Now, there are exceptions to this, and I don't 100% believe this, but there's this pool of energy. And they go on to explain this idea that if you have negative energy, you have negative emotion, maybe you feel like you're being taken advantage of, or someone's crossing boundaries with you, and you don't say anything, what happens is the energy just grows. It festers. It rots from the inside. It magnifies and amplifies. And the best thing that you can do is you should speak it out, which it's like opening the pressure valve. So like some of that negative energy can be released. So the whole doing and speaking. So this is where speaking actually comes in play, where if you can speak out the negative things, the things that you're concerned about, your level of anxiety and stress will go down. This is really important with client interaction. So if I'm sitting around talking to a prospect, and I want to know the budget. I want to know how many people are bidding on this project. I want to know if I'm the third mandatory bid. I have no chance of winning this job at all. Used to be I would hold that. If I didn't know the budget, I'd just hold it. And then later on we would guess. And so many creative people do this. So my business coach gave me permission to go ahead and say those things, to say what you think. Like, okay, so we're looking at the storyboards. What kind of budget do you have for this? And then they would say something. They'd tell you something. They would tell you nothing, or they'd make you guess. And I could play all three roles and it's fine. But what I didn't want to do was go away and not to know. Let's talk about positive emotions. You have lots of positive emotions, ambitions, dreams, desire. If you speak those into existence, your brain gets confused because you're affirmed by other people like, yes, you could do that. You're amazing. I know you're going to go on that diet. I know you're going to write that book. And you feel all the feelings that you would if you had done the work. So you don't need to do the work anymore. So positive things, some exceptions, hold on to them. Negative things, you got to release them and speak them. And what we do is we learn to say in ways that are non-judging, non-violent, non-aggressive. That's a skill. But the first step is just, I have a thought, I have a feeling, I want to release that. And I've done this experiment before. I've asked people to think of a situation that's very stressful for them, that creates a lot of anxiety, to really hold that in their brain, right? We do this kind of little exercise. And I say on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the most painful emotional experience you can have, not physical pain, but emotional pain, what would you score that at? Okay. A lot of them will say 7 or 8. Then I say, okay, now I want you to pair up and I want you to tell the other person and describe in all the crazy details what it is that stresses you out, creates anxiety, and makes you angry. And they would say it. So, okay, everybody turn back to me now. That same thought on a scale of 1 to 10, same scale. Where does it register? Some people say it's a half point lower. Some people say 2 points, and some people it's mostly gone. It's pretty incredible. So there must be some connection between your brain, your emotion, and the words that you choose. And so I just want to tell everybody, whether it's someone who's crossed lines with you or you want to know something, speak it. Let that pressure go.
I think that what you just said has a lot to digest. And I think, and if you would like to try to segue and go forward, might not do any justice, because if I was listening to this podcast right now, I think I would just replay the last 5 minutes about 3 or 4 times and try to learn from every single word you just said. So I thank you for that, because it's, verbalizing things is our gift. And sometimes we are so scared to say what we really think, because as children, we are unfiltered in our creativity, in our expression. And then we learn how to think and how to be accepted and not try to be accepted and not tread on anyone's toes, or try to be political even in some sense, in situations. And I think what you described is liberating. Just let it go. And especially in the business situations, you don't even have to feel like you're brave to speak up. We just need to ask good questions, because just like my kids, they're like, why? And I'm like, this could be really annoying, but I'm going to use it as an opportunity to actually satisfy my own curiosity and actually grow as a person. You know what? Let's ask more questions, because it's when you get to that point of authority and the self-acceptance, you're like, I'm going to ask these, well, especially the prospect, am I the third mandatory bid? And it doesn't hurt, because you've actually saved yourself and everybody else time. Okay, we'll give you a proposal if you want one. It's not necessarily going to be our best one, because you seem like you already made your mind up. And I think it's that going after the things that you want and hold that steering wheel when you drive. Like, it's liberating, because that shift in the mindset, in the energy, and in that courage is sometimes minuscule. It produces incredible things. So, Chris, thank you so much for seeing you for the second time on this show. I think there's a lot of value in this conversation that we had today, and purposely wanted to have a second conversation just so we can step away from sales we end up with sellers again anyway. But it's my sort of aim with the show to actually be on more on the human side and actually share the stories that are universal, evergreen, and whoever listens to this in a few years' time or whatever, we will be still thinking in the same way and hopefully will enrich people's lives. So thanks for what you're doing and thanks for coming on again.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm glad we could do this without the time constraint of the previous conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode of Mindful Creative Podcast. I'd love to know your thoughts, questions, or even suggestions, so please get in touch via the show notes or social channels. This episode was produced and presented by me, Radim Malinic. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil McKay from 7 Million Bikes Podcast, and the theme music was written and produced by Jack James. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Hey, just a quick note to say thank you for joining me on this episode. If this is your first time or you're a regular listener, please take a minute and rate the show on your chosen platform. A short review helps every show to be more visible to new listeners and provide them with value. So thank you for helping out. Thank you.